topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Who is January Jones? She is not a young, beautiful, talented actress on Mad Men. She is not an older, gorgeous, exotic dancer from the Johnny Carson show. She is an author, and she wrote, "Thou Shalt Not Whine," the 11th commandment that reached #1 at Amazon.com. She is a reality TV golf personality with World High Stakes Golf televised on HDNet. She is a humorist and winologist expert. She is your featured host today on January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and listen to Ms. Jones with her eclectic roster of guests as you learn life's lessons. These stories plus sharing equals success. Welcome, and remember, beware, because you are entering the no whining world of January Jones.
Hello, I'm January Jones, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast today. Now for my listeners, let me ask you a question. Would you like to learn what it's like to be a business journalist during a pandemic? Do you wonder what it takes to be a magician's assistant? Can you imagine what it would be like to interview Bill Gates or Mark Cuban? Well, that's something I'd love to do. Have you ever wondered what it would be like for a woman who has had not just one, but 2 near-death experiences? Also, if you have lost a pet recently through death, this is the show for you. Now, would you like to meet 2 people who have walked the walk and talked the talk? And they are going to talk with us now. If you can answer yes or maybe to any of the questions I've asked, then you are in the right place. And I would like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Now it's time. Sit back and relax. Go get some wine, cheese, and crackers, and join me in the no wine zone. Now let me tell you a little bit about my 2 guests today. They are fascinating guests, and I'm so excited to have them with us. He is a freelance business journalist who has written over 2,000 articles for 200 media, mostly about how famous people became successful, which is the theme for our show. He used the critical thinking from that career to write about the paranormal, including the book God Reconsidered. His wife is an award-winning artist who devoted her life to spiritual quests that culminated in being the assistant to a renowned practitioner of ceremonial magic, which is something I'm interested in hearing about. She also has had 2 near-death experiences. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show Scott Smith and Sandra Wells. Hi, Scott and Sandra. How are you doing today?
Good. Great to be back.
It's wonderful to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this. Let me ask you a question. We've all been going through this pandemic, and how has it affected your careers, and how has it affected your relationship? Can you share that with us?
Well, I can give my opinion first, and I'm in more demand than I've been in years. Being in journalism in where things actually get fact-checked, contrary to what some people believe, we have professional fact checkers. And then trying to get to famous people, of course, is not easy. I mean, it's sometimes taken me years of bugging the PR people to get to some of these people. And then when they find out I won't go away, they figure, let's just get rid of him, put him on the phone, you know.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, so it didn't so much change what I'm doing as it put a pause in business, so that a lot of companies were not sure what to say. So from that standpoint, the big companies were harder to get to. But I mostly now write about entrepreneurs for a website called Startup Savant. And I did Mark Cuban for both Investors Business Daily and for Startup Savant. And startups are all the rage because, you know, you can't really invest in the mature companies with high stock prices. Better that you spend a relatively small amount of money on a startup, and most of them don't succeed. But if it does succeed, you're going to make a fortune. So that's how venture capitalists work. So I've interviewed a lot of entrepreneurs and people who were involved in startup investments and stuff like that during the pandemic. And I've got more work than I can handle, basically. So
that's good.
It hasn't changed greatly from that standpoint. So
how about you, Sandra? How's it affected you?
Well, the pandemic, absolutely. My art career is almost non-existent. I was counting on doing shows only because I'm very dyslexic. I learned to read very early in life at 5 years old. So I'm a great reader, but being dyslexic doesn't allow me to market. And the shows are gone right now. So putting our attention on all these articles, even some of them are pro bono, so we keep our hand in the game and we stay relevant. It's been wonderful for us.
Yeah, we've been writing from about, let's see, the first one was November of 2020. We started writing a monthly article for Chattanoogan.com and Adelante in Los Angeles on what can you do during the pandemic. And everybody in Southern California thought things were closed, and so we made a minor career out of finding like 5 or 6 things every month to write about. And it's been eye-opening. We thought we knew Los Angeles, and when we're forced to, when most of the museums are closed, we started really looking at it, and we came up with something every month.
Oh, that's great. You know, it's been an interesting time for everyone. Let's face it. And so many people have had to regroup and redo their lives and their schedules. It's been challenging, but you know, you're not the first person who has told me how it's changed in a better way. And it's kind of amazing because people being forced to stretch it's amazing what they can accomplish. You know, earlier you mentioned Mark Cuban, that you had interviewed him, and I was so impressed with him many years ago. I just sent him a tweet, something very nothing really important. It was nothing to talk about, really. I just sent it to him. Then I received a personal reply.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing for a man who's that busy. Wow. I was impressed. I've always been impressed with him, even more so since I heard from him. You know, Scott, let's talk a little bit about your book, God Reconsidered. And what's its primary message? I know it's about the battle between atheism and traditional religion.
Yeah.
Yes, so, there it is. It's a wonderful.
Yeah, I put into the private chat, I no longer maintain the website. I published it 7 years ago, and it's on Amazon. And but I have a God Reconsidered Facebook page, and there's all kinds of interviews and chapters and blogs and stuff like that. Of course, it's all free for anybody who can access that. And the book came about because I had gone through some mystical experiences, and it took me a long time to understand what they meant. But the essence of it was
Mhm.
that the hardline militant skeptics about the paranormal were wrong on the one hand. And secondly, mainstream religions, East and West, also did not have the answers, especially on why they're suffering and so forth. So what I did is I tried to set up the book. I actually have no foreword, but a forewarning. And I say, if you are happy with your spiritual path, do not read this book because it will disturb you. Because I go through all the issues I went through trying to get beyond what all the mainstream religions preach about why they're suffering and so forth. But I actually open the book with 4 chapters for the skeptics because I wanted to point out that the skeptics are really just a cult, no different than any fundamentalist religion. I mean, just for example, the opening chapters are on ESP, UFOs, and near-death experiences. Now, you would think that for skeptics, for what I call the militant skeptics, that these would be easy things to knock down. But it's absolutely astounding how close-minded they are. I mean, it's kind of like, in the Catholic Church, if the Pope or the bishop says, don't read this book, it's a banned book. Well, it's really the same thing among the skeptics. Dean Radin, who wrote this brilliant book 20 years ago called The Conscious Universe, it was about the hardcore evidence from around the world, even from the Soviet Union when they were communists and stuff, that remote viewing and ESP exists. And, when I would bring this up to the skeptics, they would say, oh, no, that's a bad book. This professor from Berkeley told me so. I said, you're not willing to read it and find out if maybe the guy you're relying on, your bishop, if you will, is wrong. And it was the same thing when I went through all the other things, the UFOs. What I found is that I looked into how they try to explain away UFO incidents. Now, this was, of course, years before the current Pentagon thing, and I knew Harry Reid, incidentally, quite well. I was in politics at one time, and of course, we didn't. Even though Area 51 is in his state, Nevada, we never discussed UFOs. We were both Mormons, and I was running a newsletter for Mormon Democrats.
Scott, I'm going to just have to take a little break here.
Sure.
And when we come back, we're going to talk to Sandra about what it was like working for a magician. We'll be right back.
Lately, there's a whining epidemic in our world. People are even whining about whining. Are you sick and tired of listening to everyone whining all the time? So was January Jones, the author of Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment that reached #1 at Amazon.com. Ms. Jones based her book on a survey of the top 10 things that people whine about at all ages and all stages of life. January is a success coach that can tell you how to help others. When you buy Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment, you'll find out what people whine about and how to stop them from whining. This is the perfect gift book to give or get for any occasion. Thou Shalt Not Whine was voted the best gift to be given anonymously for those special people in your life. Ms. Jones is an internationally known author in the style of Irma Bombeck, specializing in housewife humor, with her book being published in Korea and China. You can find Thou Shalt Not Whine at Amazon.com.
Welcome back to the No Wine Zone with my guests, Sandra Wells and Scott Smith, who are definitely not whiners because they are winners. Before you begin our next segment, Scott and Sandra, could you share your contact information with our listeners and how they can get a hold of you, buy your books? And this information will be put on the chat line below our screen.
Right. So it's on Amazon. God Reconsidered is the book. My prior book, The Soul of Your Pet, is also on there. It's rather expensive, but you can get together a bunch of people who lost their pets, buy one copy and Xerox it and give it to everybody with my permission, because it's been out of print for a few years and it's having an afterlife there. And then everything else on God Reconsidered is on the God Reconsidered Facebook page. And you can contact me there to get a hold of Sandra. Sandra doesn't yet have a website because she's dyslexic and has trouble trying to get the online business together. But as she said, she's a big reader. She managed to read so early, like at 5, that she kind of quantum leaped the normal dyslexic problem.
Oh, wonderful. Sandra, let's talk a little bit about this apprentice to a famous practitioner of ritual magic and exactly what happened when you work with him. And you talk about it in the past, so I'm curious as to why you're still not working together.
Well, absolutely. I had the most fabulous life because of him, truly. I was a very unhappy young girl, very rebellious. And I looked here and looked there and really had very little answers. And then I had my first near-death experience. In that experience, I realized that there's more to the world than I thought. And all the books I looked at as a young girl, like Ayn Rand and the Communist Manifesto and Mein Kampf, whatever I thought I was reading, nothing compared to this invisible world that existed out there that I just wanted in. So I started reading about the Golden Dawn and Jesse Herman. It got heavier and heavier and heavier. And the more time I put into it, the more I realized this is what I really want in life or anything else. So that's how I got started with this teacher who, by accident, I'd been doing a little homework. I ended up getting invited to his home with his fiancée. And I went because it seemed like it was interesting. And there, believe it or not, I saw a library with all my books that I saved years and years of looking for these special books. And he had all these books. And I was so used to having phony people say they were psychic, they were mediums, they were this, they were that. There was nothing of the sort. So I saw these books. I said, do you really? These are your books? He says, yeah. Do you practice? He said, yes. I said, would you be willing to work with me maybe someday? He said, maybe. Well, it turns out I get home, and a few days later he calls me up and he said, well, I think I will work with you. And I said, well, you've got a fiance. I don't know if I really want to do that. Anyway, make a long story short, 6 months went by. He called me. Finally, I agreed to see him because I thought, well, how impressive can he be? And one Christmas Eve, he showed up on appointment on a motorcycle. And I had a townhouse at the time with windows and doors. And he said to me, did you get the things I asked? And I said, yes. He said, brings out a little case. And in the case, he said, I'm going to use a little something. Do you know what a magic circle is? And I said, I know what it is. I've read about it, but I certainly don't meet anybody that's ever experienced it. He said, can you think you can handle it? Because if you can, I ask one thing. Do not leave the circle while I'm talking or when I'm doing anything.
Okay.
So okay. I sat down. He started a little case, north, south, east, and west. And as he's talking, the room got filled with an unspeakable kind of strange energy. And then it's kind of like reminded me of Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist, that heavy duty, so heavy. I thought, how can I possibly sit here? How can he walk around? How can this happen? And I kind of blanked out. And then all of a sudden I said, oh my God, it works. I entered this world that I didn't know existed. And our relationship was for like 9 years. And he was the real deal. So that's the most important thing ever happened in my entire life. And he moved to Michigan. I went there to see him one last time. It was 9 years of operation. I really felt I was a vessel. He had wanted to train me to be like him. But it's very time consuming. It took up all my time. I couldn't do it. I was happy just to be the vessel. And then he died. And I didn't follow through, so I couldn't do it. Really needed a person with that kind of ability. Where the world opened up. And it's a totally different experience. It's remarkable. And I'll get back to what happened later.
Wow, what an amazing experience. And how old were you at the time that he came into your life?
Well, at that time I was having very bad relationships as usual. Everybody's a failure. I wanted help on that. And the fact that he worked, I really wasn't ever going to see him again until I invited the devil into my house. Uh, a whole year went by until I saw him after the first time. In
Uh,
that year, I felt a lessening of the load of the relationships I had. My life was much, much, much more serene. I think I
mhm.
think I can do it. I can handle this. And that was the beginning of me being the vessel. And I don't know of anybody else who ever worked with but me. And his background is quite well known. I don't wish to discuss it because it's very, very controversial. And I have a lot of friends and enemies both. But it was the experience of my lifetime, truly.
Mhm.
Truly was.
Have you written a book about this?
No.
No.
Tell me, Scott.
She has done we did a number of coast to coast shows,
Oh,
and
wow.
we were
Yeah.
on Aeon Byte, which is kind of a Gnostic or esoteric show, and she's gone into quite a bit of detail. And incidentally, I knew this happened because I knew him and I
Oh,
had some time to spend with him and talk with him. And also, she was not trying to impress me when she first told me about it. She was just scared out of her wits. And it wasn't like she was bragging, like she said, she thought she invited the devil to her home. But he was a very deep and interesting guy, infamous and famous in
uh-huh.
his time. And the most important thing that he did is her father became deathly sick, and her mother was freaking out, not ready for her husband to die. And she cut a deal with the teacher, and he did a ritual. And at the end, he said he's going to live 5 more years. And that's exactly how long he stayed alive. But the doctors thought he was going to die immediately. So
Oh,
that's a practical application of magic.
yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. I've always just loved talking to psychics and interviewing psychics, and I've had some sessions with some very famous psychics. Sylvia Brown, for one, was a very interesting psychic. She was a very prolific writer too, which I'm very sorry I never had her on the show, but she was amazing. Right now, we're going to take a break. And would you like to hear about who killed Kennedy? Who do you think had the money, the motive, and the means? Well, my books will tell you the whole story.
Let me ask you a question. Are you still wondering who killed Kennedy? Over 50 years later, the assassination is still a mystery. It is unfinished business for our country. Now, get ready for a theory that you've never heard before, but will make more sense than any other conspiracy theory that you've ever heard in the past. January Jones speaks the unspeakable in her book, Jackie, Ari, and Jack, The Tragic Love Triangle, connecting Jackie and Aristotle Onassis romantically prior to JFK's assassination. Did you know that Ari was Jackie's guest in the White House during the JFK funeral? He was the only non-family member who was invited by Jackie to stay there during the funeral. Aristotle Onassis was one of the wealthiest men in the world, with the means, the motive, and the money to order an assassination that was the perfect crime of the last century. Ari needed class, and Jackie needed cash. They were perfect for each other. Now, what is Camelot? It is but another tragic love triangle. Jackie, Ari, and Jack is available at JanuaryJones.com, Amazon.com, and audiobooks.com, read by Ms. Jones.
Welcome back. We're visiting with Scott and Sandra, and we're sharing some interesting stories, success stories that they can share with us. Tell us a little bit about you wrote for Fate magazine and interviewed Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic. Tell us how did that went, and tell us a
You
little
know,
bit about him.
yeah.
Fascinating.
People may not, who don't pay attention to that whole world, may not recall him or, think he's been out of the picture for 20 years and stuff. Um, and I'm going to let Sandra tell you how we met him, or how she introduced me to him first.
Well, first of all, I was best friends with Peter Herkos, in my opinion, the best psychic in the world. And he was brought to this country by Andrew Bahalish, a very famous investigator, very famous scientist, very acclaimed. He and Uri Geller to this country, I guess, in 1965. So when I met Andrea, he invited me to his house in North Carolina. I spent about a week there, and he was obsessed with UFOs and everything you can imagine. And while I was there, I had a chance to really get to know him a little bit. And he introduced me originally to Uri, and I introduced Uri to Scott. So it's took time. But Andre Bahalish was truly a remarkable man, and he had fabulous interaction with both Peter and Uri. Well, Peter got very sick and passed away, but Uri has really, really soared. He really is thriving. He's very rich, very famous. He lives in London or Israel right now, friends with the Prime Minister. So really, really, he stays relevant all these years. And actually, we can't believe how we kept our hand in the game.
Yeah, what happened was, the first time she had known Uri and the gang for a few years. We got an assignment about 20 years ago from Psychic World, which no longer continues. And I read James Randi's expose, A Hardened Skeptic and a Magician. And so I was all ready to give him a hard time. And Randy said, when he asks you to draw a picture, go in the other room because he'll watch the top of the pencil and so forth and so on. So I did what he said, and Uri still guessed what I had done. And then Randy said, well, it's a trick when he bends the keys or spoons or whatever. He puts a little liquid on his finger and rubs it. So we stood far back from him. He never touched the key, and we saw the key bend as he put his mind to work. So we knew that Randy was lying. So it was only after that I read the parapsychologist Scott Rogo's Psychic Breakthroughs Today, where he talked about Randy's fraudulent explanations. So we interviewed him, we tested him. It was very interesting for Psychic World, and he hadn't been in Fate in a very, very long time. And then we lost contact. And then about a year ago, we were on the Coast to Coast show, and at the very end in the call-ins, George Newry, the host, had Uri call in from Israel.
Oh my God.
We hadn't heard from him in 20 years, so it was a shocker. But he had 2 new books out, Learn to Dose and Use Your Psychic Powers on How to Develop Your Psychic Abilities. So after the show, we said, it's been a long time since you were in Fate. Can we do an update on you? Because as Sandra said, he's very rich. What he does is he'll look at maps and he will show oil and gold companies where they should go. And
oh my gosh,
he's made an unbelievable. He has a big mansion outside London, and he lives in Tel Aviv now. And but he's a very interesting, friendly guy. And there is a book out that blew our minds. We had never read this before we wrote this new article. It's in Fate magazine at fatemag.com. It's issue 738, which is the current one. And we mentioned this book, which is called by James Margolis, who's a very famous nonfiction New York Times bestselling writer, called Uri Geller, CIA Master Spy ? What blew our minds is the very, very well documented information about how the CIA basically was trying to use him for remote viewing against the Soviets, because the Soviet atheists had already concluded that psychic abilities were just a natural phenomenon. And so they were using them to try to get into our computers and everything like that, how to block them psychically. The book will convert any skeptic about Uri's powers. He was tested by SRI, Stanford Research International, double-blind test. It's kind of a consciousness-changing book, and we never knew anything about this when we were involved with Uri. So Yeah, we got to know him really well, and we're in touch with him. And he's got a website. I think it's urigeller.com or something like
Mhm.
that. And
Yeah.
he's extremely active, but he's just been kind of off the stage. And he has these 2 new books out. Oh, he has a new museum, incidentally, outside in Jaffa, outside it's a suburb of Tel Aviv.
Well, he sounds like he'd be a very useful connection if you're looking for oil. And I'm sure the CIA could find plenty for him to do and use his abilities. That's a fascinating story. I'd love to interview him sometime. He sounds like almost as interesting as both of you. Now, have you ever talk about some other genuine psychics that are psychics who maybe claim to be genuine? How do you go about determining if they have real abilities or if they're, like con people? What's
Well,
your test for a psychic?
give you an idea. I had a very unsuccessful relationship as usual. Boyfriend that was like a serious relationship in my mind, but not in his. And he was giving me a hard time. And Peter says, bring him over to the house. I'll do a reading on his cat. So bring him over, and he gets a hold of this guy's cat.
Mhm.
He's called me later with very bad English, very, very unarticulate. He was like, had a accent. I called him later. He said, listen, I looked at his hat. Here's what I think. You're going to be away in New York next week. He is taking Percodot, which is a pill, a pain pill, along with other pills. He won't die, but you're away, he's going to be in the hospital, sick as a dog. And he's not concerned about his other ex-wife at all. He doesn't want her to get married to him. He doesn't care about you or anybody but himself. They're just him. Get rid of this bum. He's no good. I said, but I love him. He said, of course you do. Of course you love him. Another distraction. Get rid of him. He was right. I finally got rid of the guy. But everything he said to me, there's a lady in New York City who took a little receipt out of your bag. A receipt I was going to go to get a credit at Saks Fifth Avenue. Peter said, be aware. Go to the store and tell him somebody has the receipt. I retrieved my receipt because of Peter, 3,000 miles away. That's how close he was on everything. Really, really client of Sony Pictures and the Queen, and for reasons. He really was that good.
The problem with Sandra knows, we tested a lot of psychics for Fate magazine. Most of them were really not very good. I mean, some people have intuition. A lot of them will use tarot cards or something to try to pick up reactions from people. Was impressed by James Van Praagh. Did very, very thorough note taking on everything he said at a session. Then I did a long interview with him. But we've learned something. Harry Houdini did an expose, 100 years ago of a supposedly phony medium, but actually there's a lot of evidence she was genuine. And one of the things that Uri told us is, the problem, particularly if you're early in your career, you know you're good. But when you're around skeptics, it interferes with your ability. And so you sometimes will cheat or fudge things or guess, and then people find out and then they dismiss you. And he says this is true with all psychics. And I talked to James Van Praagh, and he said the same thing. I also knew Bevy Jagers, who was a very famous psychic for murder cases. I interviewed a bunch of police. But what I found is cheating is not the big problem. The problem is that they think they're better than they are, because everybody remembers the hits and the positive things, and they tend to forget about the times they missed. And so as I go through these things, there may be like 80% right, which would be really remarkable, but 20% of the time they're just off. So it's the parapsychologist Scott Rogo said it's like a bad electrical connection. You're not totally in control. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And Sandra's a good example, because I've seen her go up to people, total strangers on the street, and touch them. The psychokinesis, which Peter had with the hat. and she can tell them where they're stuck in their relationships and their professional careers.
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't work all the time. She has to wait for the insight to hit, you know. So this is why there's so much controversy. It's very hard to find really good psychics, you know. But but you know, if you pay attention, you'll find the good ones, and you'll realize that most of them are, you know, it's better just to develop your own intuition, and that's where Uri's book comes in. The Use Your Psychic Powers. It gives you a step-by-step plan on how to do it.
Okay. We're going to take a break now and talk about some priceless people who have been on my shows in the past. When we come back, we're going to get Scott and Sandra's take on aliens, abduction, and what happens to your pet after you lose them.
Have you ever met someone who was unforgettable? Someone who has touched your heart and soul? People who have faced difficult problems? People who have struggled to find solutions? People who fearlessly shared their stories? People who have not only informed you, but inspired you? People who have priceless personalities? I have been fortunate to host an internet radio talk show called January Jones Sharing Success Stories, and it has been my privilege to interview hundreds of guests. My guests have shared their stories, their struggles, their secrets, and their successes in their own words. In this book, we're talking about people dealing with problems such as incest, molestation, runaway kids, child abuse, drug abuse, polygamy, unemployment, scandal, and starting over. Then there are my guests dealing with difficult physical struggles such as blindness, cancer, and birth defects that are beyond traumatic. My guests have all been exciting, eclectic, and energizing. They have amazed, amused, and even astonished me. I have adored getting to meet them, and I adore sharing them with you.
Attention all listeners. Priceless Personalities, Success Stories Shared by January Jones, Volume 2 is now available at Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle editions. You'll be able to meet 10 amazing people who will be sharing their own personal stories with all their struggles, successes, and solutions, sprinkled with lots of humor and hope. Priceless Personalities features a teenager who becomes one of the famous Supremes from Motown, a nurse who as a humorist helps people to heal, an inspiring laughter yoga instructor, a mother dealing with the loss of a child, an incredible motivational speaker, a woman who married 5 times, a gifted paranormal nurse, a wise economist, a funny female humorist, along with an older man sharing his sweet childhood in the Deep South. January's guests are all amazing and amusing. You will never forget meeting them. Go to Amazon.com for your own priceless experience.
Welcome back with my friends Scott and Sandra. Now, Scott, let's talk a little bit about alien abductions. You hear about this all the time, and people claim that they've gone on a spaceship, come back, their lives are changed. What do you think about it?
Well, I did an interview with C.D.B. Bryan, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who wrote a book called Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. And I had kind of his experience studying this. He said, when you start studying alien abductions, after a while, you end up in this hall of mirrors and it starts to mess with your sanity. The study of alien abductions is really what drove me into a spiritual crisis and sparked my mystical experiences. But to fully understand this, if people really want to, I did a very long blog on my God Reconsidered Facebook page. It's number 6, where I go into quite a bit of detail. So this was in reaction to a book by an author I respect, David Jacobs, who wrote The Secret Life and the Threat. Early books. I think he was a psychology professor, very sensible, rational. He showed that these tales cannot be dismissed as hallucinations or hypnotic false memories. But his latest book, Walking Among Us, I think is totally wrong. Basically, what he says is these aliens would like to take over our planet, but they're having some problems. They don't do well in this dimension, this atmosphere, and so they're trying to create hybrids. So that's what all this abduction stuff is.
Uh-huh.
And the problem is that this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Number one is
Yeah.
if the science that they talk about is really old fashioned, doesn't make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, don't tell me that you can come from another dimension and across the universe faster than the speed of light, but you can't figure out how to make a hybrid. You need these mortals to come and work with you and
Mm-hmm.
invent these hybrids who are going to gradually take over the human population. But the first thing they do, the first challenge is they've got to make them very realistic. It's kind of like we did the Lincoln robot at Disney. Now, how can we turn him into what seems to be a human being?
Uh-huh.
It really doesn't make any sense. And then he and this other guy that I have a lot of respect for try to explain why they don't just destroy the world. Why didn't they come down here and maybe how about 1,000 years ago before we got weapons and just wipe out the planet, clean it off. Send an asteroid. They destroyed the giant dinosaurs 5 times and started over with evolution. They get into these weird mystical things about how it's our karma and we've been bad people, and so we're going through this cosmic surgery, none of which makes sense.
Uh-huh.
I've explained on my God Reconsidered Facebook page why reincarnation sounds plausible until you start to really delve into it, as I
Yeah.
have.
Mm-hmm.
All these attempts by New Age and mainstream religions to blame humans for what is happening to them is really making the victims responsible for smallpox and the plague and everything else.
Right.
But the good news is that I think that these can be explained. If you go back into history, Jacques Vallée wrote about how the fairy stories are very similar to the abduction stories today.
Mm-hmm.
And these entities, which you can find in Hinduism and folklore and stuff, they actually are these entities that Gnostics would call archons, and they are negative powers, but they are limited. They pretend to be all powerful, but actually they can only kind of scare people, and they have their counterparts in the Virgin Mary and angels who are good entities, but neither of them are very powerful in this dimension. And the high God, as esoterics call him, is kind of removed from the daily events of this earth. And I argue in God Reconsidered that evolution actually was operated on its own at the cellular level. Everything can be explained scientifically at the cellular level. So all these attempts to say that these entities are actually aliens, I don't believe they are extraterrestrials. I think they're pretending to be because they know that's what we understand, and they figure that would intimidate us.
Sadly, we're running out of time, and I wanted to talk more about Sandra's near-death experiences, and I think we'll have to have you back for another show so that we can explore that. Before we close out, though, I do want to talk about Soul of Your Pet, because I told you before we came on the air that we recently lost our beloved dog after we'd had her with us for 12 years. And I think Soul of Your Pet would be very helpful for anyone listening who has lost a pet.
Right. So, when I first embarked on this, I had seen some near-death experiences that very slightingly mentioned animals in the afterlife. So I sent letters out to veterinary journals and to Fade and Psychic World and other places and said, if you have what you think is a credible experience of evidence for animal afterlife, write me. And I was inundated with letters by people who said, listen, I've never had any psychic experience. I'm not even religious, and it didn't even involve a pet that belonged to me, but here's what happened. And a lot of skeptics would say, oh, well, your dog died and you emotionally wanted to wishful thinking, created this hallucination. No, most of the stories were something like this. And this is a real example. Somebody says to their neighbor, I'm glad to see your dog is back from the vet. I saw him playing in the yard yesterday. Oh, no, he died on the veterinarian's table a week ago. And in other cases, animals like there's one gal who had a cat who died, and a week later she's sitting in the living room watching TV with her 2 living cats, and the ghost cat walks in from the kitchen across the living room and right through the closed door, and the other 2 cats can see it. They're up with their backs arched, hair up. They run over to the door, stare at it, and they won't go into that bedroom for months. So it wasn't just her imagination. So I've got 125 examples of this, and it's on Amazon. Unfortunately, it's expensive, but find a whole bunch of other people who love their deceased animals and buy a copy, and then with my permission, photocopy as many as you want and give them away, because it hasn't been in print for about 5 years. So it's having an afterlife on Amazon.
Well, that's very exciting. And I think this might be a wonderful book for veterinarians to have and to recommend to people like us who are devastated when they lose a pet. And it would be an interesting, comforting book to know that some pets have been able to reconnect. And, it keeps us hopeful that our pet would do that someday.
Yeah, well, on the next show, we'll go into some detail.
Yes, okay, we sure will. And we'll also talk about the near-death experiences. We're running out of time. And in closing, I'd like to thank both Scott and Sandra for coming on our podcast today. And remember their website. To my dear listeners, I hope you have enjoyed our time together today. I know I have. We try to be informative and inspiring. My upcoming guests will all be eclectic, exciting, and energizing. Next Tuesday live at 2 p.m. Eastern, I'll be looking forward to sharing another guest with you whose advice will help you to become successful too. Please be sure to sign in to my website and check out Scott and Sandra's internet activities. Now, my 78-year-old thought for the day is, my husband says I keep pushing his buttons. Now, if that were true, he would have found the mute button by now. Don't you think so? So for now, thank you for entering the No Whine Zone, and please share our stories and our show with everyone you know. And remember, stop whining and then start smiling. And if that doesn't work, then you can go out and just start eating chocolate. Lots and lots of chocolate. Take care and stay safe until we meet again.
We want to thank you for listening to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Always remember Ms. Jones' personal mantra, if you can think it, you can do it. That's what all of our guests have done with their lives, and so can you. You are the ultimate success coach in your own life. All you need to do will be to start sharing your own story with your family and friends. We hope that our guest stories will encourage you to explore an equation in your future that will combine your creativity plus connecting with others will enable you to be successful too. Always remember, your passion plus your purpose will equal prosperity as you explore the wonderful world of January Jones.